Khafre, thanks so much for joining me.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. I followed you on LinkedIn for a while, and I've been really impressed about the nonprofit that you've created, Hip Hop for Change, and just wanted to learn more about your critical work. For those who aren't aware, what's that are kind of watching this right now, what's the mission of Hip Hop for Change?
I guess, point blank, just what it says on our mission statement is we're a grassroots organization that advocates social justice using the tools of hip hop culture. Um, yeah, I think what it boils down for me after about 10 years of doing this work is we give paychecks to artists that deserve it and have something really important to say. Um, in collectivist cultures and communities, we're always passing on knowledge. And, every time we talk to a young person, we're always putting a little nugget of game in there and truth. That's just what we do. I think less and less we've had kind of these cultural spaces to get paid and supported while we do that. I think we used to have that a lot through hip hop, specifically rap, where we could actually get paid to pass and share knowledge in a communal space. Everybody gets to rock out, have a little self care. But I think the industry, since the '96 Telecom Act, took a lot of those spaces from us through the consolidation of music platforms. Hip Hop for Change is a response to that. It's trying to create this grassroots, funding stream that can support the natural cultural work we do as hip hop artists. Anyway, we have to be mentors for free on the weekends anyway, while we're working places to feed ourselves. But we're not geniuses. These people might be passionate educators when it comes to breakdancing or graffiti art, teaching their chiaroscuro or, positive, healthy body connections. All rappers talking about the most pressing issues in the communities. I mean, we've always had those social, political spear tips. What we're about is using the nonprofit platform to get these artists paid and to kind of boost up their voices so they can be heard by more people.
Now, KRS-One said rap is something you do, hip hop something you live. So
Yeah.
however, kind of, our media has definitely skewed what the masses think of hip hop. So, do you feel like some of the principles you try to teach about the history, beauty, and transformative spirit of hip hop as a culture?
Yeah, I mean, the Zulu Nation, they said the principal tenets of hip hop are peace, love, unity, and having fun. I think that's always been, a part of collectivist cultures, oppressed, marginalized communities. Like people got to stick together. You know what I'm saying? There's no promises in the Black community or, the marginalized poor communities that you're just going to be supported to make it. We have to hold on to our community. And I think since we were, before slavery and before the diaspora, we were still in our, own cultures with our own collective, musical, I don't know, practices that kind of united us. That's what culture is, shared practices that kind of amplify your own identities. So we've done that, whether it was the, call and response and old Negro spirituals and blues and jazz and, all the dances that came out of Black and African diaspora. I think hip hop is another facet of that. More importantly, it's one where we can get a lot of money through. And that usually comes on the ground as people in ciphers and, people sharing their artwork. These are things that don't cost anybody money. It just costs people time, effort, and passion. So this is like a center of the passion. I think that's the guiding principle for hip hop for me. You could feel it, you could experience it. And we don't often have that feeling when we look in corporate media. So we got to create that in the community we're in.
Hmm. Now, from what I understand, Hip Hop for Change has worked with colleges and universities to set up culturally responsive curriculums. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I'm really interested about these curriculums. Is each curriculum different, or is it set up differently for each college and university? What does that look like?
I mean, we start off with we have our kind of cookie cutter programs that teach hip hop or diversity, equity, inclusion through the lens of hip hop. But I think when we interact with any community, any NGO, any institution, we're always trying to get the most impact, and have the most I don't know, the most tailored program we can for the community and what they need. You know, whether we're going into UC Santa Cruz and doing a retreat for their professors and getting them all to freestyle. What do they need to learn from that? Whether I'm going in and to a Black community and to a school that, you know, comes from marginalized communities, where people don't have a high income, you know, where they're rooted already in the community of hip hop. Our class might look a little different than if I'm going to Sonoma State University, you know what I'm saying, in the wine country, for mostly, you know, white suburban kids. There's a different need, you know. So that pedagogy can look like whatever. I mean, we work with Facebook for their coding program and add the cultural relevancy to that. We've worked at, you know, schools where English is not the first language, and how do you teach to make sure that people can rock and hip hop in their own language and they feel comfortable for that. Yeah, we had kids breakdancing geometric shapes at one school in Oakland. You know what I'm saying? So hip hop is a vehicle for information, regardless of what information is necessary. I think it's pretty malleable to what population, you know, we're working with and what they need.
Now, I read that Hip Hop for Change provides itself on being an organization that goes beyond diversity and inclusion. So your leadership team is composed of people from all different backgrounds and cultures. BIPOC women sit at the very front of your table and influence every decision that your organization makes. So how do you see that influence of BIPOC women impacting Hip Hop for Change and help you grow?
I mean, if you don't have more, you know, more identities coming to the table, you don't have more first-hand lived experiences. You know what I'm saying? Like, I can teach probably a pretty cool women's empowerment class. You know what I'm saying? But I'm gonna miss a lot of things. You know, so we're just enriched by having more identities coming to the table. I feel like I've always known that, you know what I'm saying? And you don't really do community-based activism without having powerful people that come from a lot of different marginalized backgrounds there at the table. And yeah, I've been fortunate enough to come from a place like Oakland, California, where you got to walk the walk, you got to talk the talk, and people see you. And if they don't see you doing, you know, things right, they don't work with you. So the community demands a certain level of etiquette and a certain level of allyship. And I'm happy I was able to start a place like this and grow in a community like the Bay Area, rather than some other places in this United States that may or may not have so many identities present.
Yeah, I like what you said about walking the walk, talking the talk, because so, you know, you hear about diversity, inclusion in organizations and businesses, but I've always felt like as someone who oversees you know, an organization, if leadership, like the person at the top or those at the top don't really truly believe in that, like it's just not going to work out.
Yeah, I mean, and we're, you know, I come from the hood. We're traumatized people, so we're always looking, we're always checking to see how people are rolling and whatnot. Sometimes it can get pretty cutthroat, but you know, I think the most important thing always is when you're working with the community, just to have a clear conscience in your actions and what you do. I always say, if you're worrying about the babies and thinking about the babies first, everything else should be fine.
So beyond all the teaching and programs of Hip Hop for Change, you've created something that I really have connected with, the clothing for Hip Hop for Change. I'm wearing the and white supremacy sweatshirt, the hoodie.
Right on.
So in creating this clothing, and white supremacy on a lot of clothing, on your hat, your sweatshirt or whatever. It's a simple but straight to the point message. So, why did something that seems so simple, like how did that come to you? Like, yeah, let's just put this on clothing and get this out there.
When I started Hip Hop and Change, some people might not know, we're built off of a grassroots street fundraising model. Getting out there to the people, we've never really had enough money to just invest in the same platforms that allow, big, huge nonprofits to get all these monthly donations. Look at St. Jude's and how many commercials. I love St. Jude's, but I wish I had the same amount of budget they have to get monthly donations. We don't have that. So I cut my teeth being a grassroots canvasser that goes out in the community. And, we have what we call a stop line. It's the first thing you tell people. And I used to say, talk to me about hip hop and education. Um, that had a certain success rate. But you know, oftentimes I get the retort, "Oh, y'all need to turn that stuff off." And, you know, that stuff's about death and whatnot. That hurts hearing. So I started saying, "Talk to me about racism in hip hop." And so I'd still get these responses. So my stop line kind of just morphed into the bare bones of the point. Talk to me about white supremacy. It's just real. It's also kind of like a filter. You know, when I said talk to me about education, I had to talk to a lot of white supremacists because I didn't know people's, you know, where they were coming from politically, you know, so to speak. When I said talk to me about education, but if you say talk to me about white supremacy, you instantly know whether or not somebody's on your side and they're even worthy of the you know, the small amount of pay I get per hour talking to people about white supremacy. And that's essentially what I'm talking about. When I'm talking about cultural education, I have to talk about a whole history of white supremacy and how that's impacted my culture, which is half the reason I need to educate people about it because it's been taken from us. So, you know, after a while, just in white supremacy, that just it just made sense. I was like, put it on the shirt, and this became a really a better selling shirt than our own organizational logo. It just makes sense.
So you kind of, you know, talking about white supremacy, you know, it affects so much of what happens, at least here in the United States. How do you see white supremacy on its impact of hip hop culture today in 2023?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, one of the biggest things that white supremacy does, second to killing, you know, brown people, taking our lives, is to cut our, you know, socioeconomic ties. You know, so you see anything that is marketable, anything that has swag. You know, this is a system of capitalism. So what does capitalism do? It takes it and it eats it alive and it, you know, commodifies it, and it doesn't do it for the consumption of people without money. It does it for the consumption of people with money. Due to white supremacy, that has, you know, really been only around for a few hundred years. You know what I'm saying? Like these are 18th century Edwardian feudal constructs of whiteness, you know, that people are, you know, living up to. But it means that most hip hop today, especially since the 96 Telecom Act, has been designed and built, and the industry around hip hop has been honed and tuned to satiate the desires of mostly suburban white men. So, you know, a lot of people say, well, why are these people rapping about that? Well, you know, hip hop is a community and a culture, and there's jerks in every community, right? There's holy people in every community. There's like people that have, you know, whatever. There's all kind of people. But you know, the Jewish community, for example, doesn't have three major billion-dollar corporations that literally invest in only the jerks from Jewish people's community, and then touts them as if that's all Jewish people have to offer. You know, that would work with any community or culture if you had this big leviathan economy that Time, you know, Universal and Sony are. But that's what we have here. We have people believing, you know, this image that white media is putting forth about Black and brown culture. And it's really put there for the entertainment of mostly suburban white men. Yeah, so that's how it's affecting, I think, hip hop in the mainstream media. And I do think that taints hip hop culture and community for what a lot of these young kids growing up, they get to see, they get conditioned with. And, you know, that directly shows them what kind of outcomes they think they have in hip hop. If they see less positive stuff, they might rap less positive things. So we really need to start building these organizational structures to get these kids exposed to our best voices.
And we're both wearing the end white supremacy here. So I'm wondering, like, what do you see, like, particularly for as the role of white people in taking steps to end white supremacy? What do you think some of those steps should be?
Yeah, I mean, you know, ending white supremacy, just think about it. To end something is a physical action, right? It's like, it's not passive, you know what I'm saying? Like KRS One said, like hip is the move, you know, hip is the knowledge, hop is the movement of that knowledge. So you want to be hip hop, you gotta make your knowledge move. You gotta make it impactful. And to end white supremacy, you got to make your knowledge actually physically stop that. You know, like Jane Elliott said in front of that room full of white folks, she said, well, stand up if you want to be treated like black people do. No white people stood up. She said, so it means you understand what's going on, but why are you comfortable with allowing it to happen to them? Nobody's doing anything about it. So I think in order to end, white supremacy, and if we're gonna do it, we got to do it through certain frames. If we're doing it through the frame of hip hop, there's a point in time where Public Enemy was the number one, group in America, and that was bought by more white people than anything, just like it is now. So what do we want white people to do? To actively buy stuff that celebrates our culture, not celebrates the death and destruction of our women, of our children, you know what I'm saying, of our economy, you know what I'm saying, of whatever. I often tell people when I go to schools, white suburban schools, I say, look, if I'm going to experiment with heavy metal, right, I'm not going to listen to neo-Nazi heavy metal first, right? That's not going to be my first endeavor into the heavy metal scene. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So why the heck are these suburban white kids going directly into and celebrating Black death for their first endeavor into my culture? There's so much more hip hop than just let me kill this dude, let me kill that dude. And I'm not talking about the creative genius of some of these people that celebrate the conditions in their community, death and destruction. Because some people do, especially since poverty is directly correlative to violence. You know what I'm saying? In fact, it's the only thing that does correlate to violence is poverty in America. But I'm saying that, like, number one is I think people tend to blame us for not being 100% pious and holy in hip hop, instead of blaming these white suburban kids for being fascinated with acting like thugs. You know what I'm saying? They're fascinated by that, and that makes a small portion of our narrative.
Why do you think they're so fascinated by it? Like I'm an old person now in my 40s, but I remember when I was younger, I'd never understood why, like people my age, that were listening to rap weren't listening to De La Soul and Tribe Called Quest and Common and things like that.
I have an idea. Joy DeGruy talks about epigenetic slave trauma syndrome. You know what I'm saying? Just like the fact that all this trauma is built into us today to where we process glucose different. You know what I'm saying? We deal with famine differently. I also think that white folks that come from that history of monstrosity, right, of rape and genocide and murder and just degrading people and selling people's kids, I think that's also in that genetics too. White people have a monopoly on violence, right? White people are a violent race of people for the last 300 years since the term white was coined. In a conversation about who was really white. Was it the Italian Renaissance, like Venetian folks, or was it the Anglo-Saxons? And was it the white people in America doing all this? This was the conversation that created this violent culture. And I think that violence oftentimes is cultural. I think that white people in America has upheld a lot of, at best paternalism, you know what I'm saying, culturally, and at worst, genocidal mania, sociopathy. And I think that's in white people as a culture. But I think that goes forth towards celebrating Black death. I think it's a further validation of what white people have been putting in white media since birth of a nation. I see it as an unbroken chain and just one and the same.
And what artists today do you feel like people should, I mean, there's probably a lot, but what artists today do you feel like people should be paying more attention to?
I feel like
other than you.
And I am coming out with my third album pretty soon. But I think to be anti-racist is an action. And I think part of that is a search and a discovery for validating Black people. I feel like we have been given this thing that does not show excellence within hip hop. I also think it's time for people, because of all the privileges we have, to do the research and do the homework, right? Type in positive hip hop and put your city after it. And you might see a couple local people that are rapping that need you to buy their album and need you to pay $15. I'm not talking about $480 to go to this festival that people do every year. But go to 10 local hip hop shows and like support your local hip hop artists, or really be quiet about hip hop. But I feel like being, bringing an end to racism in the frame of hip hop is an action like doing the research. Who's dope in your community that you can support? Yeah, just type in positive hip hop. Type in hip hop education. You'll find a myriad of artists, worldwide that are doing it. There's not even just people in the U.S. People are rocking in Mumbai doing amazing stuff. Syria, Glasgow. There's a whole like youth scene of like trap rappers out there. If y'all want to see some crazy like young white kids rapping about death and destruction, there's so much stuff going on in hip hop. I think that people just need to take the time to look it up.
And for those that are watching and listening right now, how can they learn more about Hip Hop for Change?
Type it in Google. Type in Hip Hop for Change. Go to our website. You can go to YouTube, type in Hip Hop for Change. We got a lot of videos on hip hop, what hip hop's dealing with. We have videos from our education director talking about the Asian influence on hip hop, women's empowerment classes. We throw the largest environmental justice summit in the nation last year at the Presidio out here in San Francisco. We curate hip hop for a lot of organizations. We taught 30,000 kids nationwide. So just type in Hip Hop for Change. If you need us to come to your school, let us know. K through 12, if they can sing Frere Jacques, they can rap. If you need us to do DEI for your organization or your company, we'll be out there too. Just reach out to us. We're here.
Well, what happens at the Environmental Justice Summit?
Yeah, I mean, again, we use hip hop to advocate social justice, and one of the most important, things going on in Black and brown communities is the years of environmental injustice and environmental racism and environmental predation, really. When we see, places like Cancer Alley in Louisiana and whatnot, we see in Black and brown neighborhoods where they put garbage dumps. Where I'm from, we had the second most toxic Superfund site in the nation with the Navy Hunters Point shipyard right next to a Black neighborhood. And, we're dying of certain kind of cancers, lead and Fruitvale here in Oakland. So because of white industry and because of the fact that, white America never cared about Black and brown people, they were allowed to put these environmental hazards in our neighborhoods. Because a lot of these environmental organizations are I think in 2020, there was $1.5 billion in environmental, philanthropy going around. Not many of that came to Black and brown people. And while a lot of these environmental organizations that are raking in millions are talking about polar bears and orangutans, they're right down the street from Black and brown neighborhoods that are drowning in poisons and toxins. So I think we really need to center, the voices of communities of color. And we do that with a fat ass hip hop show every year that's free in all ages. And it's paid for by these big, huge nonprofits that really need to start investing in Black and brown communities and Black and brown cultural events like Hip Hop for Change's Environmental Justice Summit.
And, lastly, is there anything we haven't talked about that you kind of want to bring up right now?
Yeah, always. I feel like, especially during the last few years, people have been trying to, there's been kind of like a reawakening about Black lives and how much we matter and how much we have not been supported. So there's been a lot of philanthropy and donations going around. A lot of different organizations like the ACLU, NAACP, BLM, they've seen record donations. But at the same time, a lot of our arts organizations in Black communities have gone belly up. I think people forgot about the fact that, as a betting man, I can't bet on criminal justice reform. Like, good luck on betting that white folks are going to stop killing Black people anytime soon. While it's a worthy cause, I think what Black people really need is stuff that we can bet on. And that looks like mental health for us a lot of the times. That looks like arts expression for kids and access to those practices, especially for young kids, according to the American Psychological Association. So we need people to donate. Black-led arts orgs have about 50% less money on hand, 70-something% less savings as comparable sized white orgs. And really, we're the things that give kids hope and efficacy and self-esteem. So yeah, become a monthly donor at Hip Hop for Change. As little as like $10 a month and more can really help a small organization out. Look up some organizations in your own community doing work, specifically Black-led arts organizations. These kids, Black kids specifically, have half the access to art classes as white kids in America. So donate to a Black arts org yesterday if you can.
Well, Khafre, I really appreciate your time. I just reached out to you. You didn't know me at all, and you were so kind to do this interview. Thanks so much.
Of course, man. I really appreciate the platform. We need to come together. Right on, man.